Hi, everybody. I'm Pierre Bouvard, Chief Insights Officer here at the Audio Active Group at Cumulus Media in Westwood One. And today we're exploring a media planner's conundrum. How do you reach folks that are spending the majority of their time with ad-free video streaming? Well, the surprising answer is that podcast advertising is an unbelievable way to reach the ad-free video audience. And also, it can come to the rescue of Netflix, which is experience a sophomore slump in audience for its popular returning shows. So these findings are culled from the spring 2026 podcast download report. This is a joint production of Signal Hill Insights and the Cumulus Media podcast group. This study's been conducted over the last 10 years, twice a year, and this is the 16th edition of the podcast download report. So the key findings for today is that the podcast audience significantly over-indexes on ad-free video streaming. So advertising on podcasts is an outstanding way that marketers can reach this ad-free video streaming audience that is so hard to reach. Now, video streamers should lean into audio to promote their brands and their shows because the profile of the heavy audio consumer is a perfect match for video streaming audiences. And podcast advertising can save Netflix from its sophomore slump by creating awareness and interest for its returning shows. Now, on the TV side of life, podcast consumers are big cord cutters. A third of them are not subscribing to pay TV. Now, podcast consumers spend way more of their video time watching ad-free platforms versus the total US. About 27% of total TV time in America, according to Nielsen, goes to ad-free platforms. But among weekly podcast listeners, 39% of their total TV time spent goes to ad-free platforms. And lastly, the heavier the podcast consumer, the more TV streaming content that is consumed. Now, the podcast download study, conducted twice annually, focuses on consumers who are weekly podcast listeners. In other words, people that spend at least an hour with podcasts in the past week. The spring 2026 report was conducted during April. It was a survey of 600 respondents. Now, podcast advertising is a spectacular way to reach the ad-free video audience. Weekly podcast listeners are voracious consumers of ad-free video streaming and ad-supported video streaming. And they're not likely to have a pay TV subscription. 1 out of 3 are cord nevers. Now, when we take a look at the proportion of total US TV time spent to the left in gray, 27% of all tuning minutes to TV are to ad-free platforms. Now, 39%, according to the latest data from Signal Hill and Cumulus, is the share of time spent among podcast listeners that goes to ad-free platforms. So clearly, the podcast audience is ideal to reach those ad-free consumers. And our latest data shows that 20% of weekly podcast listeners are not reached at all by streaming TV ads, whether it's because they're not a subscriber to the streaming services or they spend just most of their time with the ad-free services. Now, interestingly, the more time spent with podcasts, the more time and exposure being devoted to ad-free TV streaming. So in gray, we have the average weekly podcast consumer. In blue, we have the heavy weekly podcast consumer, defined as folks that spend 6 or more hours in the past week with podcasting. And you can see the heavy podcast consumer, 14% more likely to be a heavy ad-free TV streamer, and they spend 9% more time with ad-free platforms. So get those ad-free audiences of video streaming on podcasting. Now, Bloomberg recently reported that Netflix is having a tough time getting audiences for hit shows when the next season comes out. Bloomberg reports that many Netflix series that had huge first season success saw massive drop-offs in season 2 viewership. A couple of examples: Running Point, 4 seasons, the second season ratings were down 50%. Beef, which returned this year, dropped 70%. The Night Agent in each season saw significant drop-offs, and the second season of Avatar: The Last Airbender saw a drop of 60% for the second season. So what's going on here? Well, it's clear that the Netflix viewers of these shows are simply not aware that the shows have come back. And if you don't have awareness that the show has come back, it's going to be hard to get viewership. Now, overall, Netflix places fourth among all video TV publishers in audience with an 8 share. But that means that Netflix cannot use just its over-the-air promos on its service to get the word out about returning series. It's going to need to invest in greater marketing to create awareness that its shows have returned. So overall, podcast advertising is a spectacular way to reach heavy users of ad-free subscription video. There's high reach, high time spent, and also an outstanding way to reach cord cutters through the podcast audience. So podcast listeners way over-index on ad-free video streaming, which means they are an ideal way to reach that ad-free video streaming audiences. Audio should be used. There's a perfect match between the profile of heavy video streamers and podcast listeners. And as we just saw, podcast advertising could save Netflix from its sophomore slump by creating awareness and interest in returning shows. Now, trying to reach folks that don't have cable what you can do is by podcast advertising, because they are a great way to reach those hard to reach cable cord cutters. And overall, podcast consumers spend way more of their video TV time, 39%, watching ad-free platforms versus the total US, which is 27% of total TV time spent going to ad-free platforms. And as we saw, the heavier the listener, the more TV streaming content that gets consumed. The Audioactive Group here at Cumulus Media and Westwood One is a full-service brand advisory for national marketers. We focus on measurement, whether it's brand lift, sales effect, search and site attribution, or creative pre-testing. Each and every week, we publish a new Audio Insider case study. You can find it on our blog at cumulusmedia.com or westwood1.com. And when you're there, you can sign up to get the email of the weekly audio case study sent directly to your email. Thanks so much for the opportunity to take you through these new insights from the Signal Hill Cumulus 2026 podcast download study. Thanks so much.